What's the most important issue for Central Floridians heading into the 2024 November election? You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Joe Mario Pedersen, filling in for Brendan Byrne. In just 2 months, Central Florida voters will be casting their ballots in the November election. We brought together a small group of voters to find out how they're feeling this election season, like their thoughts on the economy and whether or not incumbents have used their time in office well.
That's another issue in Osceola County. It's like, vote for me. I've been here for 25 years. And as a transplant, I'm like, and what did you do? So I think for me, it's not so much of how long you've done something. It's what have you done with the time that you have had. And a lot of what I'm going to look at is how have you created wealth in our economy.
We'll hear more from that panel of local residents. That's ahead on The Wrap, the big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these headlines. The city of Orlando wants to spend $7.5 million to lease an unused 21,000 square foot facility in West Orlando for a new homeless shelter. The location would be easy to access, providing 24/7 entry as well as employment assistance, healthcare, and counseling for up to 250 people, but it needs approval first. District 5 Interim City Commissioner Shan Rose says the proposal has been met with mixed reactions over concerns about how well thought out it is.
I think that's the bigger concern from the residents, that it's like it came very swiftly. So it wasn't like this location is being looked at for like the last 6 months. This particular option came across really quickly, really swiftly after negotiating.
Rose says the proposal is a direct response to a new state law taking effect on October 1st, banning homeless encampments and sleeping in public areas. The Orlando City Council will take up the measure on Monday. A battle for territory between two invasive lizard species in Florida could impact the spread of serious mosquito-borne disease, like the West Nile virus. Scientists with the University of Florida are studying that question right now, as Central Florida Public Media's environment reporter Molly Durig explains.
As the large, aggressive Peters's rock agama lizard spreads north from South Florida, it's displacing another common invasive lizard, the brown anole. Anoles are like a delicacy for hungry mosquitoes, which can spread deadly disease. But with Florida's anole populations now declining, the question is what mosquitoes will turn to biting instead, says Nathan Burkett-Cadena, associate professor of entomology at the Florida Medical Entomology Laboratory.
What we think is going to happen is that mosquitoes are not going to be able to bite the brown anole. So what are they going to bite? Really, they're probably going to turn to biting birds and humans and domestic animals more.
And that could spread more disease. Burkett-Cadena says his team's running field experiments in areas full of both kinds of invasive lizards. Molly Durig, Central Florida Public Media.
An Orange County grand jury has issued recommendations for improving the Orlando Police Department's community response team, clinicians who respond to people experiencing a crisis. Central Florida Public Media's Joe Burns reports the findings follow the fatal police shooting last summer of Rachel Ellis.
The grand jury previously cleared 2 officers involved in the shooting. The woman had called 911 threatening to harm herself, and police say she charged at them wielding knives. The grand jury says the community response team needs more mental health clinicians working within the department. The jurors recommend that in possibly violent mental health cases, clinicians and police officers co-respond, and that the officers wear plain clothes and use unmarked cars. The department says it has already expanded the community response team, which will allow clinicians to respond with officers as separate units in high-risk cases. OPD says the team, which was formed in 2021, has already helped 2,500 people in crisis avoid encounters with law enforcement. Joe Burns, Central Florida Public Media.
For these stories and more, visit our website cfpublic.org. Did you know that 87% of us are the hopeful majority, tired of political divisions and looking for a way out? This year, Central Florida Public Media and StoryCorps invite you to participate in one small step and have a meaningful conversation with someone different and not so different than you. One Small Step pairs strangers with different political beliefs not to debate politics, but to get to know each other as people. Be part of the solution and sign up at cfpublic.org. StoryCorps' One Small Step and the radio station hubs are made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We're about 2 months away from the November election, and this year, we've been doing a lot of listening about the issues important to you. Not long ago, we gathered a small group of voters to talk about how they're feeling this election season. Unsurprisingly, the economy garnered a lot of discussion. In this second installment of our conversation, Central Florida Public Media's news director LaToya Dennis and Morning Edition host Talia Blake are joined by Tom Unrath from Melbourne, Tiffany Jeffers from Kissimmee, and David Walker from Harmony, Florida, just east of St. Cloud. We start with Unrath.
When it comes to the economy, what's driving you to the polls with that?
I'm not an economist. Okay, I'm a pastor. The close to economy I get is asking for people to put it in a plate. The other thing, though, is that I'm also really, really interested in what's happening in the community, the Indian River Lagoon. That's in Brevard County, and that's going to take some money. And it's going to take people doing smart things with that money to make it work. And although I know that there are a lot of politicians that are very smart, I really wish sometimes that they would take the advice of people that are smarter in specific areas, like water management, waste management, some of those kind of things, rather than assuming that because I got elected, I can make these decisions and I'm smarter than the people who got their PhD in that particular thing.
I would say for me, it's the economy of creating jobs, especially giving any kind of incentives for entrepreneurs and people to start businesses and things like that is very important. I will always look at politicians who have that interest in stimulating the economy in that way. One great thing that's happening in Osceola County is we received the CHIPS Act. So we're making semiconductors right here in Central Florida, which is very exciting and really good job creation that could be, generational shifting for people, because there's a certificate program that you can take, and at the end of 13 months, you work at Skywater, who creates the semiconductors, and you could start at $60,000, which is like, you don't need college for that. And so our congressman was very instrumental in making sure that happened through the Biden administration for us to bring that here. And so things like that are important for me when I'm looking at voting and putting someone back into office. When they do things like that, then I can recognize. And a lot of what I'm going to look at is how have you created wealth in our economy and in our community.
I think it's interesting when we talk about the economy, because you can't talk about the economy without talking about housing, right? When you look at the data, it says that actually the economy is doing pretty well. It's not as dire as a lot of people would have us think. But then when you look at something like housing and you go, so how much do I actually have to make in order to get a mortgage on that home, considering what the average Floridian, Central Floridian makes? What do you do with that?
It is diabolical. I think, who can get a mortgage? When you think about the average, and I'm thinking about my community, right? Kissimmee. You got people living in motels as a way of life. There are school buses pulling up to motels to take children to school, which when I first moved here, I cried seeing that for the first time. Then you have developers who are creating quote unquote affordable housing that starts at $1,400 a month. I mean, that is a mortgage for some people. I mean, back in the day, that was a mortgage. So I don't know how else to say it besides it is mistreatment of human beings to make it unaffordable to live. And I've been in that situation. I grew up in the projects in Baltimore. So I know firsthand what it is for my mom to have to make a decision between paying the lights and buying food. And I really am looking for candidates who are going to make sure that people have a way of life that is respectable and dignified, and that they can survive and move from survival to thriving. That is what I want to see.
David, what about you?
I retired from the New York City school system in 2015. And in 2017, I headed to Florida looking for all the sunshine and the low cost as a retired individual. And I'll never forget when I was about to buy the house, I said to the realtor, "This is my pension. And do you think that I could buy this house?" And her words to me that day in 2017 was, "Mr. Walker, you could live down here like a king on that salary down here in Florida." And I said, great. Moved down here, 7 years later, I went from living like a king to living like a pauper in some ways. And I'm saying that because the pension has stayed the same, but the cost of living has gone sky high. And even if I thought to sell my house, where am I now going to move to? Because that house is going to be more expensive than the one that I live in. So it has become very, very, very challenging for people. Now, I don't want y'all to think that when she said me living like a king, that the salary was like, I don't want y'all to think that. But it was just,
But it was you to buy a house.
But it was enough to buy a house. Exactly. Yeah. Enough to buy a house. But 7 years later, the game has changed.
So what do you do now, David? Because in previous listening sessions that we've had, I heard the same sentiment about Social Security.
Well, fortunately, I'm just short of Social Security, so I'm not there yet with that. And the benefits of a pension from New York, very helpful down here in Florida. But again, the idea of what you thought originally how your money was going to do, it has clearly changed. So what do? You now have to budget a little bit more. Can't go out as often. Can't spend frivolously anymore because technically your saving days are kind of behind you because you're living off of what you had already saved. Now, short of going back to work again, which you don't want to do that, you still have to live. You still have to do certain things to enjoy yourself, but you're more conscious of it now. Your money is not going as far as it once did because the economy has changed. And in essence, this Central Florida area is just like living in New York, to be honest with you. It is just that expensive. And obviously we have to get people into office that's going to help us to deal with the economy and to fight for the economy, reduce taxes, because everything is going up. Taxes all over, tax for this, tax for that. And it's crazy.
That was Tom Unrath from Melbourne, Tiffany Jeffers from Kissimmee, and David Walker from Harmony. Doug Bowman is also part of this panel. You can catch this next installment of this panel next Wednesday and tune in every Tuesday morning at 7:45 a.m. for more insights into Central Florida's economy and how it affects your pocket. That's it for The Wrap this week. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media 90.7 WMFE News, with assistance from News Director LaToya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. Brendan Byrne is back next week. I'm Joe Mario Pedersen. This is The Wrap.